Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. Today I'm joined by Jeff Wellstead, founder of Big Bear Partners and a 35-year veteran in HR, workforce strategy, and organizational design. Jeff has worked across industries, geographies, and company sizes, from global enterprises to hypergrowth tech startups, and has a passion for transforming HR into a strategic, data-driven powerhouse, and we need that more than ever. In this conversation, Jeff and I dive deep into the emerging concept of skills-based organizations and how AI is redefining workforce planning. Jeff shares his insights on how businesses can use AI to build dynamic skills ontologies, identify talent gaps, and reimagine the way they hire, develop, and deploy talent. We also explore the role of AI agents in streamlining HR processes, critical importance of reskilling in the age of automation and AI, and how organizations of all sizes can leverage these advancements to gain a competitive edge. Importantly, we also hit on some high-level HR personas and how those folks need to be thinking about humans and AI coexisting and what that means for growing the right skills to keep their careers moving forward. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I'm your host, Bob Pulver. And with me today is Mr. Jeff Wellstead. How you doing today, Jeff?
Doing great. Thank you very much, Bob. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. A little early for me. I'm only halfway through my first cup of coffee, but I think we'll be just fine. You and I always have
Cool.
a lot to talk about. So let's get into it. I thought you could just take a minute to give my listeners a little bit of background of who you are, what you've been doing, how you wound up across the pond.
No, absolutely. So, as you can tell from my accent, I'm an American, I'm an imposter, living over here in England now for the last 20 years, just outside London. And my career spans about 35 years, which is crazy. I can't believe it's landed on that. First half of my career in and around New York City, working for big multinational investment banks, consultancies, tech companies, and pharma. And as much as I, work for some extraordinarily prestigious brands and kind of well-known and trusted brands, I really struggled because I didn't get into HR basically to, sweat the asset basically and try to squeeze as much productivity out of people as possible, whilst at the same time, kind of dangling a paycheck over their heads. And that's kind of what it felt like, to be perfectly honest, in terms of HR's relationship, if you will, to the business. And my vision of that was just very, very different. So I had a friend of mine, a former colleague from PeopleSoft, come join me, reach out to me, I should say, because he had taken on a CEO job over in the UK and said, "Hey, Jeff, how'd you like to punch your international ticket and, spend a couple of years with me and prep this company for an acquisition?" I said, "Yep, sure, good timing." So went ahead and did it. And it was fascinating because they basically kind of said to me, in no uncertain terms, "We don't like HR." And I said, "Well, brilliant, because I'm not a big fan either in terms of traditional legacy HR." They said, "Look, we want to create something really special here. We want a place where people come, even though they've never heard of us before, but quit their perfectly good job and come join this incredible mission, because we have a lot riding on it. We think we're on to a huge winner." It was an antivirus, anti-spam, kind of company that used machine learning back in the day. This was 2004. And so it was great. I got to reinvent HR from scratch. We set it up. We prepped the company for acquisition by Symantec eventually, which was great. And I just kind of like hopped around. I kind of fell in love with the notion of working with hypergrowth tech startups, and ultimately scale ups, because you got to basically build the people function and the people strategy around that, very well. So I've now worked with as many as 16 different companies over here, helping them kind of build up and launch or get acquired or whatever it is they're looking to do. That's broadly what I do, but I'm also really huge into human resource technology, and specifically the last couple of years, super excited about AI, and because it's such a powerful use case, with all the data associated with human resource work and with people generally. That's kind of where I'm focusing my consultancy these days.
In terms of the market, you're not really focused on like big enterprise, right? You're mid-sized companies.
Indeed, yeah. Look, I nothing against the enterprise. It's just they're huge, they're big, their decision processes tend to be very slow relative to startups and scale ups. And so I love working for super agile folks. I love coming up with a plan on Monday, and by Tuesday afternoon, it's been approved, and we're actually in the process of launching it, because this way we can see results quite quickly and kind of A/B test things and all that kind of stuff. So that's primarily, yeah, what I've chosen is to focus on the the smaller, kind of recently funded companies on through to mid market, 200 employees, 500 employees, on up to say 2,000 or so.
Yeah, I would say a 36-hour turnaround on from plan to approval is not something that I ever saw in my 25 plus years at large enterprise.
I bet not.
That's for sure. I imagine just the sort of prepping for acquisition kind of concept just had me thinking about, the cultural, impacts of that exercise. I mean, I spent over 2 decades at IBM, so I'm quite familiar with what it takes to sort of fold, new companies, younger companies into the mothership, as it were.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's interesting that you got to sort of reinvent HR, but then in some ways you have the risk of, the acquiring company just kind of screwing it all up. Did you not stick around for that?
No. That was not of interest to me, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So as you talk to people about, what you're saying, you talked about, the onslaught of AI, coming in. Certainly a lot of use cases across the talent life cycle, right? So, because I
Yeah.
just, without getting into territorial sort of debates about who's really in HR or not, if you manage any part of the talent life cycle, I consider you HR in a traditional
Yeah.
sense.
Sure.
So, as you talk to companies about this, like what kind of feedback are you getting in terms of their apprehension? Are they, jumping right in? Are they, dipping their toes in the water, or are they jumping into the deep end and just saying, like, let's get after it. Let's see what this can really do, and let's experiment wherever we can, wherever it makes sense.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, look, I'm just reading a lot of the studies because, of course, I don't have time to survey, all the mid-sized businesses on the
Sure.
planet to kind of say, hey, how you guys getting along with AI? But there have been a lot of studies, a lot of research recently done by folks like McKinsey and Deloitte's and Josh Person Group with regard to the relative comfort level with adoption and exploration
Hmm.
with AI, and it's low. It's low, as you might imagine, in terms of doing anything corporately. I think people individually, for those who tend to kind of be a bit more tech savvy and quite enjoy
Yeah.
having a bit of fun, with tools like this, and of course are willing to pay whatever. It's not a lot of money. We're talking like $20 a month, for OpenAI's ChatGPT, or similar for Claude Sonnet. People are having fun with it, and to some extent, they're kind of using it to kind of augment and or kickstart their thinking about a particular thing. Corporately, though, I think there's a lot of reticence, and I think the reasons, for the most part, tend to be, number one, the persona of the buyer and the comfort level of the buyer. It just in terms of dealing with technology, but especially AI. There's just a load of noise out there in the system, and unfortunately, not a lot of signal, and not a lot of folks out there guiding people to understand the signal within the noise. To
Yeah.
say this is what this stuff actually does, and this is really what you need versus what you don't need. I think there's also a lot of concern about security, right? As you can imagine, just in terms of the fact that there's lots of horror stories out there about people kind of uploading, especially in HR, right? Uploading personnel data and so forth with all sorts of sensitive information on it. And for whatever reason, didn't set up an API key, and the thing wasn't structured properly. So there was no firewall between your information and training modules, right? Of
Yep.
these LLMs, and the information just disappears. So, but it's actually, it's really easy to remediate. It's just that, again, nobody's there to kind of tell them, don't worry about it. This is how this gets fixed, obviously. And there's a lot of people that making sure it gets fixed. So yeah, so I mean, we're talking, the adoption is probably anywhere between 15 and 24%, I think, in that space. Enterprises are definitely kind of going at this. They have a very high tolerance for risk in terms of being able to hive things off and kind of like have engineers, IT engineers, or whatever the case, play with the thing and beat it up and see what the possibilities are, and then kind of come back to the general population and explain it to people. Whereas mid-market, companies, and certainly smaller companies, unless they're already into AI, yeah, don't have that kind of budget and that kind of bandwidth.
Right.
So it's a bit of a struggle.
I hear about use cases related to like skills adoption
Yeah,
in the context of AI, right? There's a lot of vendors that are building, skills, helping you build, skills ontologies and skills intelligence
Sure.
capabilities, and having some AI, horsepower and intelligence behind how are you mapping skills to roles, people to skills to roles, and triangulating that information. But one of the things I was curious about is, for smaller companies, like you said, scale ups and companies in some growth stage into mid market, are they experiencing the same thing, or has their agility, their, I don't want to say more natural agility, but probably better position to move the chess pieces around a little bit more
Sure.
easily, perhaps? And so I was just curious if skills and the skills gaps or whatever are as much of a concern.
Really interesting question, Bob. And it's funny, right? Because I've been completely steeped and dove straight into this notion of building skills based organizations. Initially, I was skeptical about it. I was sort of like, "Oh, this sounds like some kind of a silly organizational design fad that may not last." And I was like, I really wanted to kind of understand what's sort of the use case, what is the thesis behind doing this, because it can be arguably disruptive. I've learned since actually it can operate in harmony with your sort of existing system. It's just the way you choose to kind of blend it. But it's this notion that we care less about sort of the traditional roles and job titles and the sort of boxed in kind of job descriptions that typically accompany those, and the hierarchical kind of attachment and thinking and reporting relationships that we've always ever kind of been used to all the way through the 1990s and even the early 2000s. And it's this notion of we need to kind of rethink this thing, because here's the problem: employees represent, from a cost perspective, about 75 to 80% of the balance sheet, right? That's a
Hmm.
huge, huge chunk of money. We bring them on board with the best of intentions. We hope that we properly vetted them. We hope that they're going to be productive and engage quickly and help, kind of exponentially drive results forward. All we have to kind of know anything about these people are potentially the goals they set, performance assessment against those goals, and other bits, and broadly what other people say about them, as subjective as that is. And that's basically what we get to know about people, which is a bit ridiculous considering the cost and expense and associated with it. And importantly, we also kind of tout that, look, without people, we can't deliver the stuff that we say we're going to deliver. People are our greatest asset. It's like, great, then why don't you know more than, I don't know what, 15% that you
Yeah.
currently know about them, and dive deep. Now, along comes this notion of a skills based organization whereby, instead of this whole silly process of, I'm going to present to you a doctored up CV, I'm going to somehow kind of trim a cover letter that looks and feels a lot like the job description you've kind of put out
Yep.
there. And hopefully I get an interview, and hopefully I can con everybody all the way through the process that I'm the right guy for the job, and that, the whole offer and the salary thing goes smoothly. And then there's a whole onboarding process and all this other kind of stuff. Instead of kind of doing things in that horribly inefficient and very data poor way, wouldn't it be amazing if we were able to kind of, create an intelligent skills taxonomy and ontology for every kind of role type in the business, to kind of understand that? And don't panic, folks. There are some big, massive enterprises that do this, and they have been doing it really from scratch, working with consultancies like Accenture and McKinsey and the usual suspects. But now there are AI tools that basically can scrape the internet and scrape all the job sites and do all sorts of like wonderful kind of like information gathering, and very, very quickly kind of help you develop a skills kind of taxonomy, and then eventually something called an ontology, which is sort of the relational
Yep.
components to skills that are weighted in some way, shape, or form. It's super exciting because when you know what critical skills at what level of proficiency based on any role in the organization look like, you can then actually kind of independently assess all of your employees and potentially candidates who are in a process, and say, tell us what you know about these particular subjects, where it'd be like, programming languages, or whether it be about your soft skills in negotiations and influencing, collaboration, things of that nature. And basically, that assessment now becomes a data point you can then measure and overlay, with the existing model, and say, does this person fit? This doesn't look like a great fit. I'm going to probably pass on that. Others come much closer, and you think, Those are the folks I need to talk to as a first instance. It's not a panacea, it's not a cure-all, but it sure as heck gives you a lot more insight into like who these people are. Fast forward, and then suddenly somebody comes into your organization having been matched, primarily based on skills and proficiency as assessed. And then basically you can you can basically set them up quite quickly with all the goals that they need to accomplish and everything else. Get them plugged into a performance assessment process, have them actually take a look at what skills gaps they currently have, and then automatically through the use of AI, link that directly to, pre-designed and pre-tagged learning instances online. You can also have them tagged to mentors and all sorts of folks, so that there's sort of like suddenly this process of highly personalized and targeted, kind of development and learning for somebody, which is great at the employee level, right? It's also great for their line managers because then they don't have to think about everything there is to know about this person's career path and try to kind of nurture and curate that, often doing it badly because there's just not enough time in a day, leaving a bad taste in the employee's mouth. It's great for HR.
Yep.
So, you know what I mean? Because at that level, they've got all sorts of really powerful insight and so forth in terms of the density and the talent inventory, if you will, across the business. And they immediately can then start making recommendations, right, to the C-suite, to the leadership to say, here's where we've got critical gaps. We're going to be sunsetting this product. We're going to be launching this product. We need to kind of like upskill, reskill a whole bunch of people because, again, we don't have the same critical elements that we need. I mean, you can start making commercial decisions in that regard. And it just changes, I guess, the landscape in terms of what it is we know about people and what their capabilities are. And people also then don't have to feel like they're stuck, or typecast in their role and they can never ever break out of it because the skills may in fact point them in very different career directions.
Couple things that I just wanted to call out
Yeah.
from what you were describing. One is you're right. There's a lot more sort of talent insight these days because you have all those different data sources. You've got sort of qualitative, like rich text information in terms of people's, contributions on different, platforms, and you can infer a lot from that if
Yeah.
you're so inclined and you've gone out and, aggregated, data from those public sources. You certainly want to look way past the, the resume and cover letter as you described. I mean, certainly I'm a pretty big critic, vocal critic about that whole process, right? Part of it is the manipulation, essentially,
Yeah.
like the contorting, sort of automated contortion that's happening with these customized AI generated, customized resumes, basically just finding a way to subtly or not so subtly, regurgitate, what you saw in the job description, which in itself is a flawed,
Yeah.
representation of
That's right.
what you're going to experience when, if you're lucky enough to get the role, that role I'm sure is in flux. And
Hey, we're the payroll baddies, and our mission is to make payroll fun and relatable.
And call out industry when we hear it.
You gotta call it out. You gotta call it like you see it. But we also gotta shine a light on all those unsung payroll heroes out there, making sure we get paid.
Yeah, those are the real payroll baddies out there, and we love sharing their stories and showing them love.
With gold chain and everything, baby.
By the way, SAP is the best payroll out there, and if you don't like it,
Get out.
I've talked before about we used to see like other duties as assigned on job descriptions when you and I were younger, and it's like, oh well, what the heck is that? I mean, if you put a percentage on the role, it might look like, they put it at the bottom as if it's like, maybe
It's like the
the
fine
last,
print.
yeah, the last 2% of your role might be, just some other,
Yeah. Random
light
stuff.
industrial, work, whatever. And but you have no idea. They don't put a percentage next to that. So that as the job changes, as the job changes, as their needs change, and as they understand your skills a little bit better, that could explode. But anyway, the point is, like, you've got the direct, readily apparent skills, and then you've got some skills that you may not have thought about, which might be hard to document. And
That's right.
I don't know if I would want to rely on the intelligence of one of these matching engines to do, skills, inference and skills adjacencies to really, fill out that complete, that more complete picture of
Yeah,
someone's
agreed.
profile, and but the other thing you mentioned about, once you have that skills information, being able to recommend, a coach or a mentor or learning course and things like that. If you've got, an internal talent marketplace, maybe that's your sort of orchestrator of all of that, but you don't necessarily need that if you've got some of these other pieces and you've got the integration where those
Yeah,
things can talk to each other, right? You could, like you said, you could figure out where people need to upskill and reskill and move them forward, and then they stay engaged and they become more sort of, marketable for future roles. I think one of the challenges, and this is top of mind, just because I was just talking to someone from Rejig.
yep,
They talk about, to your point, work ontologies and some of the blueprints and things like that across different industries. But my conversation with Nuno and just some of what I've heard the CEO Shaban Savage talk about is like getting skills, mapping not just people to skills and skills to roles, but the actual, tasks, the actual like work product that needs
yeah,
to be mapped as well. And so sometimes I think it's it's logical, but that seems like a whole nother layer and exercise that I'm not sure everyone has invested in doing, but it's a really important
yeah,
part, especially in the age of AI, where we have to really think about, well, what's getting sort of automated, or what are the right ways to use advanced technology to take things off our plate, and what does that mean for the skills gaps that we have? Not that I guess part of the point is that AI is not automating or taking skills away from you. It's taking tasks away from you, but at the same time, as AI advances, it is capable of more things, and we often think of skills and capabilities in the same context. So it gets a little complex for the average organization.
yeah. It does.
For
Sure.
the smaller organizations, you also may not have some of the staff to, interrogate that data. You may not have, the workforce, data science, team. You may not have a people analytics, team or whatever. But these are critically important. I mean, you've been working on this for a long time. It's like getting the right
Sure.
people in the right seats.
Indeed.
Your business strategy, the technical strategy, these aren't self-executing, right? You need the people to do this even in 2025.
Well, you need a couple of things. Like you touched on one of the really super powerful use cases, right? And it's funny because it dates all the way back to my when I first began working in corporate world. When I was working with, I'm going to date myself, Arthur Anderson before they went down with Enron, um, and I was working in the tax department in New York City, right? So huge, kind of multi-floor, skyscraper, bunch of tax accountants at all different levels, from partner all the way down to junior staff member. It was my job as the assistant director of HR, believe it or not, to be one of the people who would determine over the course of somebody else's career whether or not they had the right skills, the right experience, the right knowledge to be staffed internally on various different, tax engagements. And these were not small engagements, right? These were engagements sometimes had 15 people working on them, like for Halliburton, basically the FTSE and Fortune, kind of 500. And it was down to me, a kid who just got out of school and didn't know anything about managed corporate taxes or anything, and not even personal taxes for that matter, to basically kind of get smart about what everybody did there, what previous engagements they'd been on, and then to extrapolate basically off the top of my head who might be actually a good fit to go work for this partner or this manager on this particular account based on, I don't know what, industry expertise or whatever the case. Nobody ever gave us instructions. We didn't even know. And so here I'm in charge of all these people's careers. And I'm running around like a banshee trying to say, hey, convince people to drop whatever they're doing and come work for a different thing. It's nuts. And that's basically not changed
Yeah.
for a long old time. It really has, come down occasionally, maybe down to performance performance assessments and things of that nature. You start to kind of build some kind of a digital footprint over the course of time, say if you're working at a place like a consultancy. But it could really be any business where you have to resource projects, hopefully with people who know what they're doing, who've had experience doing things. Because if you can put those people together and then throw a couple of folks who've never done it before so they can learn from the others, and work on teams to go deliver projects and things, that would be, the best way to do it. But when you have sort of like the skills database and you have the ontologies in place and everything else, you can really support a lot of pretty deep and pretty far-reaching commercial, kind of decisions. For instance, sunsetting certain products and developing other products, going into new markets, going into new geographies, going through a restructuring, in preparation for, wanting to look attractive as an acquisition target potentially. Instead of the traditional, we don't really know. Frankly, HR doesn't even know, what people are great people versus not, other than this sort of like highly subjective performance data that we have recorded in our central HR system. That's all we have to go on. But bottom line is, CFO says we have to save, half a million or $1 million or 15 million or whatever it is, because people are the most expensive thing. Let's get rid of a whole block of those folks right up front. HR, you go sort out, who are the weak performers, that kind of thing. And then hopefully we end up exiting the right people. And in the meantime, we're going to shift priorities and kind of focus on some new kinds of work, some new products, some new directions over here. That has been my nightmare, basically, in HR, primarily in the first half of my career. Wouldn't it be amazing? The CEO and the CFO and whoever else is involved at the top trying to make these commercially powerful decisions about the direction of the company would turn to HR in the first instance and say, here's what we need to do. We've got to exit this. We've got to start this. We've got to launch this. We've got to terminate this. We're going to shift the organization in this way. HR, can we do that based on the talent, kind of inventory and density that we've got? And to be able to go away and in less than a day, come back with a report saying, look, here's basically what the sort of like the talent inventory looks like. This is kind of the distribution of capabilities from an ontology perspective. Here is the relative adjacency of skills to other skills, which means the closer they are in terms of being adjacent, the faster we can reskill or upskill those people to kind of go take that stuff on. So that process could possibly take a month, maybe a month and a half, and get that all done. And, probably save yourself 17 million in, kind of unrecoverable redundancy costs and legal costs. And, not to mention, kind of like horrible morale issues and things of that nature for those left behind, and just deep disruption to the business. There are a lot of powerful use cases for taking a much more kind of data-driven approach, with this kind of process. There are challenges to it, though, right? Because who determines, what actual skills at what level of proficiency are appropriate for particular jobs, or like you were mentioning, for a particular project, right, that you want to launch people. But that's so cool, because if you get used to, the organization gets used to the language of skills and gets comfortable with, probably some intelligent tooling. There's a lot of interesting tooling kind of emerging out there, whereby you're tracking all of these people. You're tracking, the skills ontology and taxonomies, and you're continuously updating. And the AI within these tools is going out to the world to say, how are these roles changing? It watches GitHub as an example, in terms of the different kind of, development engineers and so forth that are on there. And they kind of get a sense and a feel for, these are twisting. So, Python and React and all these different kind of languages actually are starting to merge. I don't know, a lot of different things.
Yeah,
and they get smart about it, right? So anyway, so that the bottom line is that it's just adding a powerful dimension, and being aided by AI is actually much easier than it's ever been to kind of go and pull something like this together.
Yeah, and I think that some of the AI piece, if you can pull that in, I know it's hard to predict what AI is going to be capable of doing, and things done in a
visionary voices, bold breakthroughs. This is Shally's Alley, where top recruiting minds spill their best kept secrets live every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Raw, unfiltered conversations on sourcing, hiring, and the future of talent, where we ask the tough questions no one else will. Tune in and level up.
Closed experimental sandbox kind of setting
Yeah.
aren't necessarily ready for prime time to scale across an organization, but you still have to sort of think about the trajectory of what it can do as a variable that goes into that sort of workforce planning, right? Because what you're describing there is sort of, it's almost like, do you have the tools and the folks that can actually do that scenario planning to say, here's what's going to happen. What if we move these people over here and things like that. So there was a tool that I was investigating when I worked at an RPO firm called ChartHop,
Oh yeah, sure.
and they had the ability to sort of take a org chart and make it dynamic and say, well, what would happen if we, move these folks around or whatever. The whole concept of a skills-based organization what came sort of after I was looking at tools like that. But if you pulled all that stuff together, it seems like you could say, okay,
Yeah.
well, on a conservative side, we're going to have this, the gap is going to be this big. Do we have other people inside the organization
Yep.
that could be sort of reskilled and put into those roles, or do we need to go and
Spot
start
on.
fishing again? So it's in some ways a build versus buy decision about people.
Well, it's funny you said that, right? There's a company I've been doing some work with because I quite like their price point. They're actually targeted to the mid market. That was my initial attraction, but then I got deeper into what it is they do, and it is this notion of creating both an internal marketplace, but also actually more importantly building the skills taxonomy and ontology, so that you can kind of use it for a variety of use cases, whether it be hiring or onboarding or training and development or whatever it is. The other thing is using it for resourcing, projects and things of that nature, assigning, people around the world to particular projects based on their skills base and experience, but also using it for things like pay and promotion decisions, for succession planning, because all of this stuff kind of meshes together. But one of the things you talked about that was super important was scenario planning. And that seems like such a simple, oh, yeah, sure, we can kind of do that in our heads and kind of say, well, if Jake left tomorrow, what would Martha and John do? And all this other kind of stuff. But it's not horribly scientific, to say the least. And
Yeah.
it's based entirely on subjective data. This is super powerful because when DevSkiller kind of like they sent a message out, I think yesterday on LinkedIn. And sorry, I don't mean to kind of necessarily shamelessly plug these guys versus others, but what I thought was cool was they talked about this new module that they created called, I think it was called Predictive or something like that. And it was this notion of taking the skills-based model, taking all the history of all the interactions and transactions that have occurred on it, basically, and have that then feed into a model, scenario planning model, so that you basically can start to move chess pieces around and kind of see how the fault lines change and see where gaps either increase or decrease or whatever it is. And look, that is nirvana, right? I kind of think about that movie Minority Report, right, with Tom Cruise. And they have that computer thing. They put I don't know what it is on their hands, but they suddenly have these screens all over the place. So they can just like throw that over there and put this over here and say, well,
Right.
what if we shift this? That to me would be super, super useful, especially if it's backed by decent data. Because then you can start making some very intelligent, very quick and well-informed decisions about the direction of the company.
For sure. Yeah, you just had me thinking about when I was at IBM, I was working in market intelligence and specifically in the social media analytics space. And we set up this whole, I don't know if you remember this concept of like a social media command center where you're
Yeah,
monitoring
right.
at all mentions of the brand and is there reputational risk over here and what's going on with this product launch or this,
Wild.
division or whatever. And so I've never heard of anyone doing that for talent, having
For people, right?
like a
Exactly.
talent intelligence command center would be pretty cool. And yeah, the haptic gloves might be taking it a little bit to the
Agreed.
extreme.
But you look at professional sports teams. I mean, these people, there isn't a player or a coach that doesn't have a freaking book written about them in terms of all the statistics throughout the entirety of their early
Right,
career all the way to current day, right?
right,
The level of prediction that they try to kind of then apply to, okay, this is what they've done so far. How are they going to do next year? Do you
right.
know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
And where should therefore we place them and play them? And what should we pay them? And, all this other kind of stuff. I mean, in a way, it might sound like horribly Big Brother and very intrusive and everything else, but it would be kind of cool though to kind of actually have people know I'm pretty kick-ass in a whole bunch of stuff you didn't even know I was good at. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And that's gonna be my visa to try out some different career avenues and things of that nature. Maybe get an uptick in pay. I don't know.
You're right. I mean, the level of granularity that you can get to with, because they have everything on film and it's all part of how you're
Yeah,
evaluating people. How did they do in this context, against this other team or against these other obstacles in a more HR sense. But yeah, there's a lot of data to use, and scary that a lot of it isn't used, that people haven't
yeah,
matured where they can go and complement maybe their gut and their experience with some data to either refute or support some of their assumptions, because that's basically what a lot of it is. It's assumptions, and there's human bias involved, what you think someone's capable of because they have similarities to this other person that you worked with, and they had
yeah.
success, or they did not have success, or what have you. So
That's right.
one of the things I wanted to hit on, Jeff, is we were talking about like the personas in HR, and why people got into HR in the
Yeah,
first place, and some of the reasons that some folks just don't have a great perception of HR is because it's a traditional HR setup. They're doing core HR functionality. A lot of it is sort of to play defense for the organization.
yeah, yep,
And then, like, there's another one that says, look, I came into HR because I want to help people advance. I want to
yeah.
make sure people are getting a fair chance at opportunity. I want to make sure that they're developing themselves and into areas and skills that they really are passionate about and going to help
That's
them
right.
along. And so I think in both cases, not that there's only two personas, but in both of those particular cases, AI, they're coming at the AI piece with a particular um, for the folks that are more sort of traditional HR, they're compliance, legal, working with structured, data and things like that. I think you've got a lot of disruption coming in terms of what AI can almost completely
Ultimately,
take
do.
off, yeah,
Yeah,
your plate. And so you've got to start to think about what are my transferable skills, because if AI can do half the tasks that are on my plate now, or more, then the writing's on the wall, right? Like,
sure.
it's only going to get more capable. It's only going to, these agents that my organization may implement are going to start to connect and talk to each
Yeah,
other. So I've got to really think about how I want to position myself, either at this organization or elsewhere. And
yeah,
so what are my upskilling and reskilling opportunities? And then you've got the other persona that says, look, I really want to help people, and you know I am providing this necessary human interaction. I'm building relationships, things like that. I hope you're not thinking that AI can do what I do. And these folks need to be careful as well, in my opinion. And I'd like to get yours, because you've got to think about things not from your own perspective, but also from the candidate's perspective. Would a candidate rather be ghosted, or would they rather talk to an AI?
yeah.
To me, like,
Exactly.
if we were talking about this a year from now, it would be like so obvious. Like, yeah, of course, I want to know. I want to be in the know about my own sort of
Of course.
progress, and especially in early stages, whether it's high volume hiring or not. In the early stages, like when recruiters do what they often call a recruiter phone screen, right? Like, that just that initial conversation to feel somebody out, describe the role, see if it's a fit, see if we even
Yep.
need to, continue the conversation. You may not, as a candidate, you may not need to form a relationship with that first touch point, right?
No,
Like,
of course not.
you may never talk to that person ever
Likely
again.
never
So
will. Yeah,
yeah,
spot on.
so I don't want people to get too sort of complacent in the sense that, like, what I do is this irreplaceable value that I provide to the candidate and
Yeah.
to the hiring process. And I think you're putting yourself at a disadvantage, and you're going to be caught flat-footed as this technology advances.
Yeah.
I'm curious to get your perspective on any thoughts from some of your clients, or just in general, like how that's going to be absorbed.
Well, you spoke about a couple of things. One is sort of like the kind of typical persona in the sort of HR profession. And I say typical. It is an extraordinarily deeply regulated aspect of the business, right? By all sorts of legislation. And it gets worse when you go from the US and then start to work your way back to Europe and everything else, things start to get really, really onerous. And as a result of that, these roles basically have kind of taken on very much a heavy administration, compliance and governance, kind of angle to them, and have attracted a lot of people, right, who are particularly good at that, who really enjoy doing that kind of work, which is great. They tend, though, not to be extraordinary risk takers by any stretch. In fact, they're kind of always ever kind of looking to remediate risk and kind of bring it down and document it and say, right, this is how we've got that locked in. That being the case, when they look at something like AI with all the hype, and all the kind of positive and negative talk about it, and the negative stuff is just as loud as the positive stuff. It's going to take over the world. The military is going to use it. It's all going to go haywire. And, before you know, we're going to get chased by robots down the street and all sorts of dystopian notions. Or it could be a lot more subtle than that. Having said that, oh my God, the promise of it in terms of, kind of creating some level of super intelligence and actually can develop vaccine cures rather that kills all viruses, as an example. I mean, that's like a thing. I've been just inundated with all the particular use cases out there for this. It falls on deaf ears, though, for folks who have been trying to protect the organization, to your point, playing defense and kind of making sure no baddies, kind of get through their hopefully impenetrable wall. And AI is one of those things, right? If you don't use it right, information can go missing. If you don't apply it properly, the bad information suddenly, gets amplified and communicated. So it just feels like another layer of difficulty. But in truth, very quickly this year, we are going way beyond large language models, where you can kind of just put a bunch of information, upload documents and videos and all sorts of things, and then ask, AI a bunch of questions about it and get some good answers. There is going to be this huge influx of things called agents, basically, which are actually capable of performing tasks that you aim it to. So you can actually create HR agents, as an example, through sort of a bot kind of modality, and then have that thing just exist on every form of communication that your company uses it. So it's like HR on tap 24/7, 365. Click here, ask me any question, whether it's about taking holiday or whether it's about going on maternity leave or about getting a promotion or getting a pay raise or you name it. You ask it. This thing knows everything because you've uploaded all that information, structured and unstructured, into it. And it suddenly takes out the bottom two layers of chaff, of annoyance, of HR help desk work that you basically have been a slave to all this time.
Yep.
And you can build in all sorts of clever things like, red flag when it appears there's a compliance issue, and you can kind of put in the parameters for that. So you can always have a human in the loop. But these chatbots are remarkable, right? AI agents. You can also then program them to integrate with all your HR tools, right? And potentially with finance and whatever it is you want to connect them to, and give it the capacity to actually perform transactions. Again, without anybody having to do it. And, it's just you at 2:00 in the morning for some reason can't sleep. I've just got to, I don't know what, I got to take a look at my, kind of balance sheet, for my 401k, my retirement plan and everything else. I'm just going to redo it while I'm thinking about it. And you could do potentially all of that if the AI agents are programmed into it. So there's a lot that can be done, and it gets you out of the business of the base stuff. So you can then start to focus on the truly strategic stuff, like we were talking about in terms of creating a skills-based organization and all of the incumbent insights that might give you. So that's the direction things are going.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about. And I think just for the folks in HR, to your point, whether it's, an assistant that takes, that level one support kind of stuff off your plate, and these are, even that is not like the conversational AI and the chatbots we had,
right.
7-8 years ago even. And then, moving up the sort of AI maturity scale a little bit, these agents that are actually executing tasks on your behalf or whatever. So there's, I guess the message here is don't be complacent in what you're doing. Don't assume that your sort of, quote unquote human touch has the longevity that you that you might think, and pay attention to what's going on around you, and don't be caught flat-footed, because we're talking about your livelihood and your career.
One more thing I'll just add at
Yeah.
the end here. Like you talked earlier, right, about the fact that a lot of people got into HR because they wanted to help people, right? They wanted to
Right.
help people realize their potential, everything else.
Right.
Well, this technology, if you kind of set it all up correctly, can in fact give you the time and headspace to kind of focus on things like coaching, on giving people direction, on healing wounds, on dealing with, helping people navigate the trajectory of their careers and things of that nature. Whereas, then all of the bulk work is actually being taken care of by machinery. But don't run away from the machinery. It's important for you to know what it does and what its capabilities are, and what its strengths and weaknesses are as well.
Excellent. Jeff, as usual, excellent conversation. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks,
And
Bob. It was
I'm
fun.
sure there's a lot of good insight for my listeners. So thank you again.
My pleasure, mate. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.